I never thought betrayal would find me at my age, especially not wrapped in paperwork and silence. That afternoon started like any other quiet day in my little Ohio kitchen. I was sitting at the round table by the window, the one with the loose leg my grandson always joked about, sorting through bills and old documents. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, so I took my time. I needed a copy of my marriage certificate for a tax filing. Nothing dramatic. Just routine. Or so I thought. I drove myself to the county office, humming along to a gospel song on the radio, never once suspecting that my whole life was about to crack open. The clerk tapped at her computer longer than expected. Her brow furrowed. She looked up at me slowly, the way people do when they're about to say something that can't be taken back. "Ma'am," she said gently, "according to our records, you've been legally divorced for almost 7 months." I laughed. A small, confused laugh. I told her she must be mistaken. I was still married. I still shared a bed. Still cooked dinner for my husband, Calvin. Still folded his work shirts every Sunday night. She didn't argue. She just turned the screen toward me. And just like that, my breath left my body. I walked out of that building in a fog, my purse clutched tight against my chest. I sat in my car and stared straight ahead, my hands shaking so badly I had to rest them on my lap. According to the state, my husband had erased our marriage without ever telling me. Calvin and I had been married for 28 years. I raised our children. Supported him when his construction business was slow. Believed every excuse he gave me when he started coming home late. Looking back now, the signs were there. They always are, aren't they? He used to call me on his way home, asking what I was cooking, telling me about traffic. Then the calls stopped. Then the dinners got quiet. He became irritated when I asked simple questions. Like I was interrupting something more important. He guarded his phone like it held secrets. Took it into the bathroom. Flipped it face down when I walked by. If I asked who he was texting, he'd sigh and say I was imagining things. Money became a wall between us. We used to plan together. Then suddenly, I wouldn't understand. He said handling finances stressed him out, so I should let him manage it. I trusted him. That was my biggest mistake. One evening, he brought home papers, saying we needed to update some property information. He tapped the line where he wanted my signature. I signed. I didn't read closely. I trusted my husband. That signature was a trap. When I begged the clerk for copies of the divorce file, my heart shattered piece by piece. Calvin had filed in a different county 2 hours away. He'd listed my forged signature on every page. He had rewritten our life on paper, leaving me with almost nothing. According to those documents, I had agreed to it all. I hadn't. As I sat on my bed that night, holding papers that proved my marriage ended without my consent, one truth burned through me. I hadn't been a wife to him anymore. I had been a convenience. And the betrayal was only just beginning. I thought learning my marriage was erased behind my back was the worst pain I'd ever feel. I was wrong. Once the shock settled into my bones, the memories started lining up like accusations. Little moments I brushed off. Small doubts I buried because I wanted peace in my home. Betrayal doesn't usually crash in loudly. It sneaks in quiet and patient. Calvin didn't change overnight. He unraveled slowly. The laughter faded first. Then the conversations. Then the warmth. He'd come home later each night with tired excuses. Extra work. Delayed deliveries. A client who wouldn't stop calling. Every answer was short, clipped, like my questions were burdens instead of concern. He stopped sitting with me after dinner. Took his plate to the living room. Watched television with the volume high enough to keep me from talking. If I tried anyway, he'd sigh, rubbing his face like I was exhausting him. And that phone. Lord, that phone never left his hand. If it buzzed, he'd step outside. If I entered the room, the screen went dark. Once when I reached for it by mistake, he snapped so sharply I barely recognized him. "You don't trust me?" he asked, offended. I apologized. Imagine that. I apologized. When I returned to the courthouse to ask questions, the clerk hesitated, then told me something else. Calvin had listed a different address during the divorce process. Not our home. Another address across town. My chest tightened as I drove there. I told myself it might be nothing. A mailing error. A storage unit. Anything but what my heart already knew. His truck was parked outside. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. Then the balcony door opened. A woman stepped out, barefoot, laughing into her phone. She moved like she belonged there. Like the space was hers. Comfortable. Familiar. I didn't know her name then. But I knew what she was. Later, through a mutual acquaintance, I learned the truth. Her name was Paige. Younger. Confident. Someone Calvin met while working on a renovation project. He told her he was basically divorced. Just waiting on paperwork. Made me sound like a chapter already closed. While I cooked dinner and folded his laundry, he was building a new life. That night I packed quietly. I took only what I paid for. What mattered. I didn't want reminders. Not the couch we chose together. Not the framed wedding photo I once cherished. I found a small one-bedroom rental on the edge of town. Thin walls. Old carpet. But it was mine. And for the first time in months I could breathe. The nights were the hardest. Silence is loud when you're grieving betrayal. I cried softly so the neighbors wouldn't hear. I took extra shifts at the hospital to avoid my thoughts. My children called worried. I told them we grew apart. I couldn't bring myself to say I'd been deceived, replaced, and discarded. But one night, sitting alone in that little living room, something shifted. I whispered out loud that I wasn't done yet. Calvin took my marriage. He took my trust. But he wasn't going to take the rest of my life. And I had no idea then that fate was already setting something unbelievable into motion. I never imagined a gas station receipt would change my life more than my marriage ever did. That morning my body felt older than it ever had. My feet ached. My back throbbed. I had just finished one of the longest overnight shifts of my nursing career, the kind that leaves your eyes burning and your spirit drained. All I wanted was to get home without falling asleep at the wheel. I stopped at a small gas station just outside town. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I shuffled inside, craving cheap coffee and silence. While waiting in line, my eyes landed on a rack of scratch-off tickets by the counter. I'd never been the gambling type. I raised children. I paid bills. I believed in steady work, not luck. But something nudged me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the universe finally whispering my name. I picked up a $5 ticket without thinking and slid it across the counter. The cashier barely looked at me as she rang it up. I tucked it into my purse and drove home. Later, sitting alone at my tiny kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside me, I scratched the ticket slowly. No excitement. No expectations. Just passing time before sleep. The first row meant nothing to me. The second made me pause. By the third, my hands started shaking. I read the instructions again. And again. My heart pounded, but not from joy. From disbelief. According to that little cardboard square, I had won a staggering amount of money. More money than I had ever imagined touching in my lifetime. I sat there frozen, staring at it like it might disappear. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. My first thought wasn't happiness. It was fear. What if Calvin somehow finds out? The betrayal had taught me a hard lesson. Trust was dangerous. And I knew if he caught wind of this, he would try to take it. Manipulate me. Twist the law the way he twisted our marriage. I hid the ticket in an envelope and tucked it inside an old cookbook. I barely slept that day. My mind raced with questions. Was it real? Was it a mistake? Would it bring more trouble than relief? The next morning I forced myself to think clearly. Panic had never served me well. I called an attorney recommended by a coworker. Her name was Denise Walker. Calm voice. Sharp mind. The kind of woman who listened more than she spoke. When I told her everything, the secret divorce, the forgery, the lottery ticket, she didn't flinch. She reviewed the documents carefully. Then she gave me the first sense of safety I'd felt in a long time. The winnings were mine. I was legally divorced before I bought the ticket. Calvin had no claim. With her guidance, I claimed the money quietly. No press. No announcements. Everything locked down and protected. I didn't rush out and spend it. I bought a modest home in a peaceful neighborhood. Paid off every debt I had. Put the rest away carefully. For the first time in years, I woke up without a knot in my stomach. I sat in my new living room one evening, sunlight spilling across the floor, and felt something unfamiliar. Peace. I wasn't healed yet. But I was safe. And somewhere across town, the man who betrayed me had no idea his carefully built lies were about to collapse. While I was learning how to breathe again, Calvin's world was quietly unraveling. At first I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't care. I was focused on rebuilding myself one calm morning at a time. But news has a way of traveling, especially when pride starts cracking. Calvin's construction business had been struggling long before he left me. I just didn't know it. Bills piled up. Jobs went unfinished. Clients complained. Suppliers demanded payments he couldn't make. The same shortcuts he took in our marriage showed up in his work. Paige noticed too. She began seeing the real man behind the charm. The excuses. The blame. The way nothing was ever his fault. When eviction notices started appearing and his phone rang nonstop, she asked questions. And this time the truth cornered him. She found out he hadn't been almost divorced. He had lied. About his finances. His stability. His past. About me. She packed her things and left without ceremony. Without her income, Calvin couldn't afford the condo. He moved in with a coworker, then bounced between cheap rentals. His truck got repossessed. His pride followed shortly after. That's when the calls started. Unknown numbers. Blocked numbers. Late-night voicemails I never listened to. I knew it was him. Desperation has a sound even in silence. One quiet afternoon I was watering the small plants outside my home when I heard hurried footsteps. I turned and froze. Calvin stood at the end of my driveway. He looked smaller. Older. His clothes wrinkled. His eyes red like sleep avoided him. For a moment, every memory rushed back. "Please," he said, voice cracking. "I made a mistake." He reached for my hand. I stepped back. He blamed stress. Money. Paige. Confusion. Said he never stopped loving me. Said everything fell apart without me. His words tumbled over each other, rehearsed but desperate. Then his eyes drifted around my home. The clean yard. The quiet street. That's when I knew. He wasn't there for love. He was there for help. "Just a small loan," he said softly. "Just until I get back on my feet." I listened without interrupting. Without anger. When he finished, I simply said, "You already took everything I had to give." I walked inside and closed the door. A few days later, my attorney sent him a formal letter. Firm. No contact. No manipulation. No second chances. I sat alone that night feeling something unexpected. Relief. Not from revenge. From freedom. And for the first time I truly understood this truth. The strongest response to betrayal is silence and boundaries. And I was finally done explaining myself to a man who never listened in the first place. After the letter was sent, I expected to feel triumphant. I didn't. What I felt instead was a quiet heaviness settling in my chest. Not regret. Not longing. Just the weight of years I had given to someone who never planned to protect me the way I protected him. I sat alone in my living room that evening, the house humming softly around me, and allowed myself to grieve. Not the man Calvin turned out to be, but the life I thought we were building. The future I imagined. The version of him I loved because I believed he loved me back. Betrayal leaves scars you don't see right away. It makes you question your instincts, your memories, even your worth. But something had changed in me. I no longer needed answers from him. I no longer needed apologies that came too late. Closure, I learned, doesn't arrive through confrontation. It arrives when you stop waiting for someone else to fix what they broke. Weeks passed. Then months. I settled into a routine that belonged entirely to me. Mornings with quiet coffee. Afternoons tending to my small garden. Evenings spent reading books I had always meant to read but never had time for. I took short trips to places I'd once talked about visiting someday. Small coastal towns. Quiet roads. Places where nobody knew my story. And slowly, without forcing it, the pain loosened its grip. I also started giving back quietly. I donated to a local women's shelter. Volunteered when I could. I saw myself in those women. The confusion. The fear. The disbelief that someone they loved could betray them so completely. Helping them reminded me I wasn't weak. I was trusting. And trusting is not a flaw. It's a gift, just one that must be guarded. Occasionally, I heard whispers about Calvin. Jobs lost. Bridges burned. People he'd wronged catching on. Karma didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with consequences. I didn't smile at that. I didn't celebrate. I simply let it be. One evening, sitting on my porch as the sun dipped low, I realized something that stopped me in my tracks. I felt peaceful. Not because everything had been perfect, but because I had survived what tried to break me. And for the first time since that courthouse day, I wasn't just moving forward. I was free. People think healing is loud. It isn't. Healing is quiet and it sneaks up on you when you're not paying attention. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't dreamed about Calvin in weeks. That's when I knew something inside me had shifted for good. The anger had softened. The questions had stopped circling. His name no longer carried weight in my chest. I began living with intention instead of survival. I changed my routines, took longer walks, ate meals slowly. I laughed more even if it surprised me at first. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. After decades of being a wife, a mother, and the steady one, I finally allowed myself to just be. The money stayed quiet. I didn't flash it. I didn't talk about it. I invested carefully, listened to advice, and planned for a future that didn't depend on anyone else's promises. Security, I learned, isn't about wealth. It's about peace of mind. My children noticed the change before I did. "You sound lighter," my daughter said on the phone one evening. I smiled at that. I didn't tell them everything. Not because I was ashamed anymore, but because I didn't need to explain my strength to anyone. Some stories are meant to stay sacred. Then one afternoon an old friend stopped by. She hadn't seen Calvin around in months and asked gently if I was doing okay. I looked around my home, the plants thriving, the sunlight warm on the floor, and I answered honestly, "I'm better than okay." That surprised us both. I learned something important during that season. Betrayal doesn't just reveal who hurt you. It reveals who you are when everything familiar is stripped away. And who I found was a woman far stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I wasn't broken. I was tested. And I passed. Occasionally, a wave of sadness would come, usually late at night. I let it. I didn't fight it. Healing isn't pretending the pain didn't happen. It's allowing it to pass through without letting it take residence. I stopped asking why Calvin did what he did. The answer wouldn't change anything. Some people choose deceit because it's easier than honesty. That was his burden, not mine. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sky turn pink, a thought settled in my heart. He walked away when he thought I had nothing. He never realized I had everything I needed inside me all along. And that knowledge felt better than revenge ever could. I didn't win because he lost. I won because I chose myself. And that, my dear, is the quiet power no one can ever take from you. Time has a way of revealing the truth you were too close to see before. Months after Calvin showed up at my door, life continued unfolding in gentle, ordinary ways. And that's how I knew I was truly healing. There was no chaos anymore. No waiting for the next shoe to drop. Just steady days that belonged to me. I started reconnecting with people I had unknowingly drifted from during my marriage. Friends I stopped calling because Calvin didn't like long conversations. Family members I kept at a distance to keep peace in my home. I hadn't realized how small my world had become until I watched it grow again. One afternoon, my sister came over and helped me rearrange the living room. We laughed about old memories, some painful, some sweet. At one point, she stopped and looked at me closely. "You know," she said, "you don't look like someone who's been through hell." I knew what she meant. I looked like someone who survived it. Every now and then, I'd hear updates about Calvin through mutual acquaintances. He had tried to start over more than once. New job ideas. New promises. None of them stuck. People were cautious around him now. Stories have a way of catching up to liars. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I felt distance. And distance is powerful. I realized something important during that time. Betrayal doesn't just end relationships. It changes how you see people. It teaches you to listen not just to words but to patterns. To notice what someone does when they think no one is watching. I became more selective with my energy. More protective of my peace. I stopped over-explaining myself. Something didn't feel right, I trusted that feeling. I also forgave myself. For the missed signs. For the blind trust. For loving deeply. Because love, even when it's misplaced, is not a weakness. One quiet evening, as I watered my plants and watched the sun dip behind the trees, I felt a calm certainty settle in my heart. The chapter Calvin wrote in my life was over. He no longer had access to my time, my heart, or my future. And for the first time, I wasn't defined by what I lost. I was defined by what I protected. My peace. My dignity. My life. And I knew without a doubt that the best part of my story had only just begun. I'm sitting on my porch now as I tell you this, the evening air cool and gentle against my skin. The sun is sinking low, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. Moments like this used to pass me by. I was always worrying. Always fixing. Always holding things together for everyone else. Not anymore. When I look back, I don't see a woman who was foolish or weak. I see a grandmother who loved deeply, trusted fully, and paid a heavy price for it. Betrayal changed my life, yes. It shattered a marriage I thought would last until my last breath. But it also gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Clarity. Calvin walked out of my life the moment he believed I had nothing left to offer him. No youth. No leverage. No advantage. He thought I was replaceable. Disposable. Easy to erase with a few forged signatures and quiet lies. What he never understood was this. I was never empty. I was full of strength, patience, and resilience. Full of wisdom earned through years of sacrifice. Full of a heart that knew how to rebuild, even when broken. I didn't rise because I got lucky. I rose because I protected myself. Because I chose peace over chaos. Because I stopped chasing answers from someone who never respected the truth. Today my life is simple. And I love it that way. My home is calm. My days are mine. I give where I want. I rest when I need to. I no longer measure my worth by someone else's approval. Sometimes I think of Calvin, but not with anger. Just distance. He is a lesson I no longer need to repeat. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Betrayal does not mean the end of your life. It means the end of an illusion. And what you build after that can be stronger, truer, and more peaceful than anything you ever imagined. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what part stayed with you the most. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mabel's Stories for more real-life stories of family betrayal, hidden truths, and quiet strength. Until next time, remember this. Sometimes losing everything is how you finally find yourself.